All right. Well, thank you for joining me today. Good morning to you. My first question is, how has the Xavier Society for the Blind, and you, by the way, how have you and the Xavier Society for the Blind been serving God and the blind for over 120 years? So, you can dig into the history, dig into your connection to the organization. Just go for it.
Sure, sure. Well, what we like to say is that in a nutshell, we deliver faith and inspiration in both Braille and audio. And then I guess the more formal mission statement is that we provide the Word of God and the best of Roman Catholic teaching and literature, and also spiritual, inspirational material to blind and visually impaired persons of any faith in whatever format best meets their needs. And we do that at no charge. And we're always exploring ways in which we can provide that material, in more accessible formats and to more people over time. So we started, as you said, we started in 1900 here in New York City. Our co-founders were Father Joseph Stottleman, a Jesuit priest, and Margaret Coffey. And Margaret was a young blind woman who taught blind children. And she realized that there was a need to produce books in raised print. At that time, it was New York Point. It was one of the, came before Braille, widely used Braille, but New York Point. She realized that there was a need to produce books for the children that she was teaching, so that they'd have the same materials and the same books that their sighted classmates had. So she got together with Father Stottleman, and they were both down, I guess they were active in St. Francis Xavier Church here on 16th Street in New York. And they got together and decided that they were going to produce books for blind children. And we took our name because at the time we were borrowing space from what was then called Xavier College, which was also located down on 16th Street. So we took our name from the parish and the college, and we got started in 1900. Now, Margaret, in addition to being one of our co-founders, she was also one of our first large major donors, and she contributed $350, which at that time was quite a lot of money. I think we calculated, in today's equivalent, it would have been something like $11,000. So she contributed $350 to purchase a stereograph machine, which allowed Xavier Society to produce raised print books in larger quantities, larger volumes. And that was the new technology at the time, the stereograph machine. So we began production of books, and the first book that we produced in any sort of volume was the Baltimore Catechism. So that's sort of the history and the mission in a nutshell, if you would, Aaron.
That's excellent. Yeah, that's really, really good. In a lot of ways, not to compare, but your organization does remind me a lot in some ways of the Jewish Braille Institute too.
Mm-hmm.
But very some similarity, except that the Jewish Braille Institute produces material for the Jewish faith, and yours produces material for all faith.
Yeah. Now we're
right.
primarily a Catholic organization,
Sure.
and one of our co-founders was a Jesuit priest. So, the great majority of our materials, our content is related to the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith, but not exclusively. And we do quite a lot just related to spirituality, religion in general, and inspiration. But you're right. It's interesting. When I first started in this position, I went over with a couple of my colleagues from Xavier Society and visited the JBI International, the Jewish Braille Institute. So very similar organizations. Even sort of the location. They're also, for a long time we were located on the east side of Manhattan, and we owned our own building. We do not own our own building any longer, but they, similarly sized building, similar location. So the parallels were really striking.
Sure, sure. So what if someone comes to you and they say, what specific materials do you have? Let's say that someone wants to have some spiritual materials. What specific materials do you have that you offer? And how do you go about distributing those materials? And generally, I mean, you serve people all over the world, but where are most of your materials going to when they're shipped, maybe, overseas? What do you think about that?
Sure. So, sort of the biggest and the best, the most popular, if you would, is the Bible. So we've produced the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, in Braille, and we make that available. And that, that was quite an undertaking a few years ago when we began providing the Bible in Braille, because it's over 40 volumes. So it takes up, I'm here in our conference room in New York, and it takes up a whole bookcase in our conference room. So that was a big undertaking, and anyone who requests, the full Bible all at once, they have to be ready to receive a lot of boxes and over 40 volumes of that. But we also, will emboss and send out either on paper or electronically in BRF individual books of the Bible. So we provide the Bible. We provide textbooks. We do a lot of work for young children in school and in catechetical classes who are learning their faith. So we'll provide the resource books for them in Braille. A lot of popular Catholic titles over time, have been provided in both audio and in Braille. One of the largest, if you would, product lines that we provide are the Sunday Mass propers. So for Catholics, they would be familiar with the Missalette. So it's the weekly readings and prayers and responses for the Sunday Mass. So we send the Mass propers out to about 800 people all across the United States, and also in 20 countries outside the United States. And that we did a back of the envelope calculation a couple of years ago, and that amounts to about 750,000 pages of Braille each year. So we, those are sort of the bread and butter offerings, if you would. And then recently, some of the books, just to give you an idea of some of the books that we produced recently in Braille. There is an author, Jeannie Gaffigan, and she's married to the comedian and actor Jim Gaffigan. She had a very serious health crisis a few years ago, and she wrote a book, and it became a New York Times bestseller. And it's called When Life Gives You Pears, The Healing Power of Family, Faith, and Funny People. So she related her experiences with her, medical crisis and how she overcame that, largely due to her faith and her family. So that's the type of book, while you'd say, well, that's really not, a Catholic theology book, but it is a book about faith, and it is a book about inspiration and healing. So we're trying to do more titles like that. Now that's a book that's available in audio through Audible, but certainly not available in Braille. So we decided that it would be important to make that available in Braille. And then, there are other things that are more directly related to religion and Catholicism. One book, again, recently that we produced in Braille, it's called The Heart of Perfection, How the Saints Taught Me to Trade My Dream of Perfect for God's. And that's by an author, Colleen Carroll Campbell. And that has proven to be very popular with our patrons as well. So that hopefully gives you a sense of, or a flavor of some of the content that we provide.
Thank you. It certainly does. Um, and more about more about me, by the way, a little bit more about me, of course. So, as you know, my name is Aaron Richmond. And and I'm blind, and of course, I had to receive materials in my life for various religious reasons over my life. So I just really appreciate the work that your organization does, because it is important. And I think that a lot of blind people around the world can sometimes even feel left out when it comes to accessing and finding out about theology and finding out about faith, being able to access this material. It really is important, because one of the complaints, or one of the concerns that I've heard around the blindness community, is that a lot of blind people do not feel included in their faith. So the fact that you're providing that knowledge and that material is really important. So I appreciate it. And now, how did you find out about the organization yourself? Would you like to share, a little bit about your background and things like that?
Sure, sure. So, I had a long career in the corporate world, and the organization, the company that I was working for, in different roles that I had in that company, both here in New York and also in Texas. My wife and I and our family spent about 15 years in Texas. I did a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, large nonprofit organizations. And I had decided, gosh, it was probably about 10 years or so ago, that at some point, and as I was coming up to the 30-year mark of my career with that company, I decided that, maybe it's time to do something different. And I always thought that I would like to work for a nonprofit, directly for a nonprofit, rather than working with nonprofit organizations. So I made the decision. I went back to school at age roughly 54, and I obtained a master's degree in nonprofit leadership here in New York City at Fordham University. And after I graduated, then I started to look for a full-time position in the nonprofit sector. So, as luck would have it, or divine intervention, however you want to look at it, Xavier Society was looking for a new executive director. And at that time, they were looking for someone who had a business background, but understood nonprofits and was familiar with the Catholic faith and the Jesuit ethos, just because for a long, long time, most of the history, the executive director or the leader of Xavier Society had been a Jesuit priest, but the board had decided they wanted someone with a business background. So I found myself shortly after I graduated working as executive director for Xavier Society, and I've been at it here now for just over 4.5 years, nearly 5 years.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so how were they able to tell that you were knowledgeable about about the Jesuit faith and the Catholic faith? Did they ask you, are you a Catholic? Are you a Jesuit? Did they ask you questions about those faiths? That's sort of interesting that they were. I mean, it's understandable, but that's interesting that that was a stipulation, you being knowledgeable of that faith.
Yeah. So it wasn't a requirement that I be Catholic or Roman Catholic, but certainly having a knowledge or being familiar with the Catholic faith was important. And I often say that I scored a hat trick with Fordham University, because I have an undergraduate degree from Fordham. I have an MBA from Fordham, and in 2015 I earned my master's degree in nonprofit leadership from Fordham. So Fordham is the Jesuit University of New York City. So by virtue of having 3 degrees with Fordham, I think they got a sense that I was familiar with the Catholic faith and the Jesuit ministry. And then also, it came out in conversation in terms of my background. I attended a Catholic elementary school and Catholic high school. So I often joke that between that education, Catholic elementary school, high school, and 3 degrees from Fordham University, I have more Catholic education than probably the Pope does. So that came across quite obviously.
Well, great. Excellent. So, and I think it's interesting to study this. How do you feel the Catholic faith relates to nonprofits, and how has the Catholic faith helped you to basically to run your nonprofit? What is the connection philosophically, theologically between Catholicism and a nonprofit? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think, first and foremost, it's service, right? And providing service to people, in this case, the, blind and visually impaired people, people with disabilities for whom such services, are not available elsewhere. So I think, that's long been, a cornerstone of the Catholic faith and Catholic Church is to serve people, right? To focus on, the apostolates of the church, getting out and working in the community, not just focused on, the building the church, but focused on people. So I think that's sort of first and foremost. And then I also think, it was interesting because I came from, with a business background, and I looked at the number of people we were serving, and if one were to get overly financially analytical and say, well, my goodness, it costs so much to produce just one book in Braille for one person, is that a good business model? And no, it's not a good business model, but it's certainly what we want to be doing as a service organization, as a nonprofit, as a Catholic apostolate, a Jesuit apostolate. It's certainly something that we want to be doing.
That's excellent. Yeah. So what are the materials that you have from, other faiths? Do you have, materials from, Judaism, other things from, Islam, spiritual texts from Buddhism? Like what, do you have all sorts of things from all faiths all over the world?
So I wouldn't say that, we have the, a lot of the doctrines and the theology texts related to other faiths. But, we do some of the books that we do provide, relate to other faiths. So a good example is a book that we produced recently in digital talking book. It's called Finding Jesus Among Muslims, How Loving Islam Makes Me a Better Catholic. So we don't necessarily focus exclusively on the Catholic religion, but we do have a number of titles and texts that are related to other religions and to faith and spirituality more generally.
And that's excellent. The way that I found out about your organization is I think you guys posted in several blindness organization groups around Facebook, to which I had never heard of you guys before. It seems like you produce, it's either I can't really tell, it's some sort of a radio audio format, some sort of a podcast or something like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that if you understand? I think you produce a lot of audio materials yourselves, right?
So we produce audio books. So we've appeared on a number of radio shows and podcasts and things of that nature. But we don't produce a podcast of our own. And we do produce audio books in the digital talking book format. So that's the format that's compatible with the players, the players that are provided free of charge by the National Library Service for the blind and print disabled. And we started we've always done audiobooks in the different formats over the years, whether it's on vinyl or reel-to-reel or cassette or CD. But within the last 2 years, we've made the move to the digital talking book format in order for our patrons to be able to listen to books that we produce on the machines that are provided by the National Library Service for the blind. So we rely on volunteer readers to read the books, and then we work with a number of freelance audio engineers to make sure that the quality of the recording is of a very high standard.
Excellent. And what is the process that you go through to find volunteers to read these books? That takes a lot of time.
It does. And I can attest to that because I recently recorded a book myself. I just wanted to make sure that I fully understood the process. And I think it's a great experience, and it's a great way to volunteer. So I did that recently, and it was very enlightening and educational, informative for me. But it's interesting. So my name is Malachy, and we were trying to find, we really wanted to, in addition to improving our content, right, choosing titles that we thought would be more appealing to more people, we wanted to focus on also the quality of the recording. So we provide our volunteer readers with the equipment to do the recording, so we can, again, make sure that we maintain a high standard of quality. We also, as I mentioned, work with a number of freelance audio engineers to ensure that level of quality is high. So the thing that we were missing, we thought, was just a good group of volunteer readers who would just add a little bit more in terms of dramatic impact to the recordings, to the readings. So we started thinking about this and said, okay, well, where can we find people with an acting background, a theatrical background, who are interested in our mission, understanding that much of what we do is related to the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. So we went over to St. Malachy's Church. So St. Malachy's has what's called the Actors Chapel here in Midtown Manhattan in the theater district on Broadway. So we started advertising and recruiting at St. Malachy's, the Actors Chapel, and we were able to recruit a number of volunteer readers with acting backgrounds, either aspiring actors or working actors. So that's how we found several of our regular readers.
Right, and I get it because your name is Malachy, so you went over to Malachy.
That's right, St. Malachy's Church.
Malachy, yes. Yeah, that's extremely interesting. Most of the readers for Audible, most of those people are professional actors, the vast majority. But I think someone could still do a pretty good read on an audiobook, provided that they really put emotion into it and really care about what they're reading. That's what I would say. I mean, do you ask the readers, why you're interested in recording this particular text? Because that's a question I would ask. Why is this text important for you to record?
Well, it's sort of the other way around. We choose the books, and then we want to make sure that the readers are comfortable with the text and that they think the text is interesting, because if they're interested in the book, then our listeners, the people who are listening to the books, I think will be more engaged with the book. So that's important. And the other piece of it is that, I think one doesn't have to be an actor. As I mentioned, I just read my first book, and I was just more worried about sort of the clarity and the making sure I got the pronunciation correct. things like that. So, but I think it does make a difference. You have to be able to, get across the passion or the emphasis in the right places in order for people to really enjoy listening to those books.
Right. And blind people are sensitive about that. There's there was a complaint or a comment that was made in one of the other podcasts I listened to about this very topic. And just to let you know, it is possible for blind people not to listen to a book just because they don't like the reader. That does happen. So
yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because when we first did the pilot of this project, we had a couple of our regular patrons we were sending the initial recordings to, and one comment was, the book, it sounds great, the quality is terrific, I just don't like the sound of the reader's voice, and that was one person's opinion. And he said, well, and I let a friend of mine listen to it, and he was fine. He thought the voice was fine. He goes, but for whatever reason, he goes, I just didn't like the sound of the voice. So yeah, I mean, you can't please everyone all the time.
Yeah, it's nothing personal, but you have to really, the reason I asked the question about if you ask why they want to read the books that they're reading is because you really have to take ownership. You have to give the book a voice and really put your voice in. You have to give the text a voice. And if you aren't passionate about it, or and maybe you just don't have a good voice for it, that's one thing that they would say maybe to a person. Maybe your voice just isn't good for audio material.
Right.
That is possible. I
Right.
asked, I don't know to where or to when I asked this, but I asked another guest, why don't people, when authors write a book and then they put it up on Audible, I always wonder why doesn't the author read it themselves? And they explained, well, maybe the author doesn't have a good voice for reading, which is the reasoning behind that. Or maybe they don't, maybe they would prefer to have an actor read their own book. There is a culture behind that. A lot of times when a book is published, the author wants an actor to read it,
Right.
because if they were that great of an actor, they wouldn't have written the book, is the way that they think through that usually.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting again that you say that, because one of our initiatives is to produce more audiobook titles in Spanish. And we have a book currently that's being read, and we're trying to, so that the challenge for us is finding someone who's willing to do the reading, volunteer to do the reading in Spanish. And then one of our audio engineers is a native Spanish speaker. So that's good. We need that. So when we were doing this book, we said, well, you know what? Maybe we should reach out to the author and see if the author would be interested in doing the reading. And she was honored. She's like, oh, I can't tell you how much this means to me. And I'm so honored that you would ask me to do this. And she said, of course, I'll do the reading. So we try to tap the authors to do that whenever we can.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the next logical question would be back to the physical Braille books. How many requests do you get from overseas where people say, I'm from France, do you have any Braille materials already translated into French Braille, or things like that? Have you ever gotten that request?
So we do occasionally, and right now all we do is English language. So we don't do anything in foreign languages with regard to Braille. And so any requests that we get from outside the United States would typically be for the mass propers in Braille, and then for any titles that we already have available in English. So they would be, as you can imagine, in English-speaking nations outside the United States.
Right. Yeah, that's understandable. Oftentimes the Braille in other languages, because I've read it in French or maybe even in Hebrew or other languages, the Braille codes in those countries are actually quite simple. So it wouldn't be too terribly Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, I admit. It wouldn't be too terribly difficult to start producing books in other languages, but then again, probably it probably would end up being a lot harder than I'm aware. Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and that's understandable. If we had the resources and the people to do that, I would love to be able to do it. You know, we're just, you know, at this point in time, we're focused on serving as many people as we can in the United States, and we think there are a lot more people out there who could benefit from the materials that we provide if they just knew about us, right? So I think, as you alluded to earlier, you hadn't heard about us, and I think that Xavier Society for the Blind is still, you know, a very well kept secret. So we're trying to change that and trying to let people know that we're still here after over 120 years, and we want to serve more people. We have, you know, we have a great deal of content already available. You know, and the sort of the good business model would be to share what we have with more people.
You know, you should never, I guess I have a philosophy that in life you should never keep secrets, especially good ones. And the fact that your organization is giving people spirituality and knowledge makes this a worthwhile, you know, project for me as a podcaster to be able to help tell your story. There's so many, probably, I wonder, do you suppose outside of you guys, and as I mentioned earlier, JBI, do you think there are other smaller organizations that are trying to do similar work to you guys that are just not known of, so they don't, you know, that nobody knows about? There's probably a lot of them, right?
Yeah, I think there are. I don't know if there are a lot of them, but I know that they exist, and I know that they're sort of, you know, maybe more geographically concentrated. So there may be an organization in the Midwest that provides a limited amount of religious or spiritual materials, you know, in that region. So, you know, we, as I said, you know, we do provide materials. We have patrons across the United States and in 20 countries outside the United States. So you know, I'm sure there are others out there, but again, just not as well known. And again, I think that's part of the issue. You know, for many blind and visually impaired people, it's not a matter of being able to, you know, see an advertisement in a magazine, you know, as you're paging through something like that. But it is important for us to be on programs like this and other programs that reach blind people and people with vision impairment so that they're aware of what we do.
Yeah, it's really important, and I think it's a very strange thing because as time goes on, it seems like it's harder and harder for organizations like yours and others to get the word out. It's almost like the more social media we have and the more we do this, it's like it's all a blur. It's becoming more and more of a blur just to get the word out about certain organizations that need to get the word out, like yours. So I really appreciate, you coming today and you being, you speaking to me, because this will really help a lot of blind people. At least, I hope it will.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think people are just overwhelmed with
Yeah.
information through, you know, all the different media channels and social media. So no, I agree 100%. So it's really trying to find the right platforms and the right organizations to through which to communicate. And you know, we've over our history, you know, we've relied very much on word of mouth and through, you know, any number of the major schools for the blind or local parishes where there are, you know, blind people using our materials, which is important. You know, it's interesting. You talked about it earlier, just sort of a sense of isolation that many blind and visually impaired people feel. And one of the things that you know, I've learned since I've joined Xavier Society is that through the provision of the Mass propers, we have many of our patrons who use those Mass propers not only to, participate in the congregation at their local parish, but in many, many cases to participate as a lector, and lead the readings in their parishes. So it really gives people the opportunity, or assists people with the opportunity to really provide, really to participate rather actively in their churches, and lead part of the celebration of Mass every Sunday.
And the participation is really important for blind people to feel that they're doing that and to actually have that opportunity. It does affect blind people more. I know that I agree that you're aware of it personally, but more than people would know. Allowing blind people to participate, even in the simplest way, it's the little things that matter. And being able to have that experience really is important for people. A bit of a strange question. Do you use WhatsApp much?
I do.
Oh, you do. Okay.
Yes.
I'm glad. Later, I will send you, if you would like, I'll send you the link to my private WhatsApp group for all of the guests that have participated in Aaron's Opinion from all over the world. One of whom happens to be a blind lady from New York, where you are, and she is a native Spanish speaker. So when you mentioned the part about needing people who are knowledgeable of the Spanish language, I thought, oh, I know someone right away. I know exactly who she is. So I know someone who's a Spanish speaker. And just out of interest, like what was that Spanish book, and where was that author from?
So the author is from, I think she's in DC now, and she spent a lot of time in Chicago. And the rough English translation of the title is 365 Days Accompanied by the Saints. So she's got a saint and a prayer, a reflection related to a saint for each of the days of the year.
Right, sure. But so you said she's a native Spanish speaker. So what is her background? Like what country is she from?
I don't know what country she's
that is
from.
fine. That is fine. Mm-hmm.
To tell you the truth. But she's an author, and she's written several books, and she's very active with the Catholic Church and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Yeah.
Oh, that's
and it's important, I think. And as the Catholic Church, if you look at the demographics for the Catholic Church, that's where the growth is. It's among the Spanish-speaking population, not only in the United States but around the world.
That's okay. That's really important to know about that. Yeah, that's really interesting. So does this person write like only in Spanish, or do they also publish English versions, or what do they mostly write in?
So I think she's written in Spanish, but I think there's also an English translation available. So it was primarily the primary target audience was Spanish language.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. Good. Okay. And what other, outside of the audiobook department, what other volunteering opportunities might there be for people if someone would want to volunteer with your organization?
So we always have opportunities. So right now, actually, we have someone who comes in a few days a week and a few hours a day, and we're doing a survey of our patrons on how they use technology. So we want to find out what people are using, what accessibility technology our patrons are using, and what we should be thinking about for the future. So, for many of our patrons, we can send an email, and send the survey via email so that they can fill it out and respond and submit it online. For many others, we don't have, they're older. They don't use email. We don't have email addresses. They don't use technology. They're, receiving books in Braille from us. So we're calling them and asking them to respond to the survey over the phone. So we always have odd projects like that we're working on as well. So there's always an opportunity to volunteer here at Xavier Society.
It's really good. So what types of questions are asked on that survey, and really what is how will that survey be used?
So, it goes through, the different types of, do you have a screen reader? Do you use JAWS? How do you prefer to read books? Do you listen to audio books? Do you use the digital talking book format? Do you use Audible? And do you have a computer? Basic things like that. Do you have a smartphone? So very, basic questions about technology generally, and then more specifically about the different types of technology that and tools that blind and visually impaired people might be using. So we have to think about the future and say, okay, well, do we need to think more about this? One of the things we're looking at is, text to speech, providing some of our books using text to speech technology. And that it's, the voice, the computer voice is not as tinny as it was, even just a few years ago. So, there's been great progress made with regard to text to speech technology. So the question for us and for our patrons is, it takes a while for us to record a book using a volunteer and audio engineers. But if we were able to provide a book that you're interested in more quickly, that's not available elsewhere, that, if we're able to provide it more quickly using text to speech technology, would you be interested in that? So, and we're currently working on a book right now and providing it to several of our patrons to get their feedback on that.
Yeah, that's excellent. So have you gotten any what conclusions have you received after doing these surveys? What are the takeaway points, I guess, that you can tell me about the way that people are using this technology and perceiving it all? What do you think?
So I can't tell you anything just yet. It would be premature because we just started the survey this week. So I haven't had a chance to look at any of the results, even any of the preliminary results or the first returns, if you would. So we're just we haven't done a deep dive like this with our patrons on the topic of technology ever before. So this is the first time we're doing it. So we're very interested in what people have to say.
That's really good. Yeah, I think I can tell you that, I am 30 years old, and I think some people my age and people younger are not really, I don't want to say turning away from religion, but I think people my age are questioning faith more. So I do think that as time goes on, it could be progressively more difficult to find people who are interested in your materials and are interested in theological materials. I don't know. Have you ever asked that question? I mean, have you ever gotten the sense that people are more or less interested in these materials?
Well, I mean, I think it parallels what's happening with the Catholic Church generally, right? Fewer people are actively participating, in church. Fewer parents are sending their children to Catholic schools or to religious education classes. We've seen it certainly here in New York, and across the country where Catholic churches and schools are being closed. So, I think it's, very evident, very obvious, from those trends. But I think people are still interested in religion generally, spirituality, and many of our books that we're producing in terms of, in addition to, the more doctrine or dogma oriented books, they're related to spirituality and, as I've said, faith generally. So, as I mentioned, the Jeannie Gaffigan book, When, Life Gives You Pears, or The Heart of Perfection, How the Saints Taught Me to Dream of Perfect. There are books like that. One of the books that we did just recently in Braille is called Learning to Pray. And that was written by Father James Martin, a Jesuit priest. But, and the title of the book is Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone. So it's not just learning to pray for Catholics or learning to pray for Christians. It's learning to pray for everyone. So I think people are, interested in those themes. In addition to, still there's quite a number of people that are interested in, books related to Catholic faith directly, as well as, the source documents, the Bible and the Catechism and other books like that.
Yeah, great. Well, I have a few more minutes left. I always like to ask some interesting questions towards the end to wrap up a great episode, which this definitely was. So how are you spending your time when you are not doing this great work?
So my wife and I have 4 grown children. We have a son and 3 daughters. So lots of family time. We like to travel. Haven't done much in the last year, obviously, because of the pandemic. I like to putz around a bit in the garden, things like that. We have a boat, a small boat, so we like to get out on the water and spend some time as a family boating as well. So a lot of our time is spent with family and doing a variety of family activities.
Excellent. And is that a sailboat or a motorboat? What specifically?
So it's a motorboat. So it's a 23-foot bow rider. So I call it a water taxi because we can get a lot of people on there and just scoot from point A to point B pretty quickly. So we enjoy.
You could probably open a business doing that, taking people from point A to point B.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. So, as we start to wrap up today, do you have any? I always like to ask, do you have any questions for me, or do you have any? I always like to phrase it like this: do you have a question that you really want to ask about me to really make me sweat to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster? I mean, what do you really want to know about me?
So what inspired you to do this, to do what you're doing?
What inspired me was that, I'm a blind person, of course, and I'm a teacher by trade. I teach English as a second language online. I've been doing that for about 6 years. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts in the blindness community, and I felt that they just were not open enough for me. They weren't really open to my opinions about things. And I figured out that since I want to share my opinions, well, why don't I just push record on my phone and see how it goes? Well, next thing I know, opinions turn into me answering people's questions on Facebook about different blindness issues. And then it just sort of built up. Before I knew it, it became a podcast without me realizing it was a podcast. And then I started to get into the Zoom and, I can upload to YouTube. And then it just sort of built itself up from there. But the real reason I podcast is because I really feel that there is a lack of strong podcasts for blind people that are truly open and receptive to all opinions. And I really mean that. Um, and I do realize that some podcasts, get big and get famous, and it becomes harder and harder to, answer all the questions. I sympathize with that, but at the same time, blind people do notice when a podcast is not open, and blind people do notice when a podcast is open-minded. So,
Mm.
know that the work that you do, us, number one, I care about it, and blind people do care about this, and we can secretly tell when organizations like yours put out great content and truly care about what they're doing. And we do notice in the community. We don't always, I confess that blind people are not always perhaps as appreciative, maybe all the time, as we should, or should, as we should be, but it is noticed. The organizations that do the right thing, it's really, really, really important. So,
Well, that's very nice to hear. So, and that's very gratifying. The other, can I ask you one more question?
of course you can.
So, what would you say is the biggest misconception about blind people or blind and visually impaired people?
Yeah, there are many, but the one that relates today is that blind people, the misconception that a lot of people have is that blind people are not interested in faith. And that couldn't be further from the truth. To tie it all together, many blind people want to be included and are extremely interested in faith. And because of the challenging situations that many blind people have, many blind people need faith. So what I'm telling you, what I'm convincing you of, not that I'm in the convincing business, which I'm not, but if I was convincing you of anything, it would be that your job really is important, and that blind people not only want Xavier to continue to produce these materials, but it's needed. It's a need. So that is truly the misconception. And then there are other silly ones, but that misconception is the most important. And if someone wants to get in touch with your organization and talk to you, how would they do that?
So, probably the easiest way would be just to call our 800 number. And that number is 800-637-9193. And I'll just say it again, 800-637-9193. You can go to our website, XavierSocietyForTheBlind.org, XavierSocietyForTheBlind.org. And just call. We have a client services coordinator here. His name is Saul, and he'd be happy to talk to folks and let them know what's available and how to sign up and get registered with us so that they can begin to receive reading materials from us, as they'd like.
Perfect. Keep up your great work. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. At this particular moment, I need to get going to my next thing. But of course, we'll talk on WhatsApp, and I will send you this episode when it's published. And keep up your great work. And if you have any questions for me, I'm always open to questions. All right?
Great. Aaron, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's wonderful meeting you.
To you as well. All right, everybody. Have a good day.